story goes that the Wachowskis were in Japan promoting The Matrix and visited animation studios that inspired them, leading to the pitch.
Planning a series of animated short subjects that will kind of take the world from the world we're in today to the world of The Matrix and how we got there.
Michael Ayers, the special effects wizard himself, was invited to produce, and we'll talk a bit more of him a little bit later. Alongside Eiko Tanaka, whose studio took centerfold in the production. It's a dream team of Japanese animators with a few they couldn't get a hold of. However, it starts something a little bit different, let's say that much. We have a surprise guest, Square, hot off the disaster which was Spirits Within. Now they're here to prove how sexy their new tech is. So it starts off being all about the glimpse. The idea of sexual tension in this instance through a male lens in a digital space, which is where I can see the missed potential. As coy as it is being, which is not much, this is about two lovers about to experience a virtual climax, wink. In this space we see some sort of newfound pause, stretch marks, and sweat. They're trying to really break through what they can do in 2003.
Traditionally the way a computer renders these things, if you think of like an eggshell, it just renders, an eggshell's pretty hollow, but it just renders the edge and the side of it. But in skin, there's volume, and light goes inside and bounces around and comes out. And all these complexities hasn't really been thought out.
But this just certainly takes on a different context when you look at it from the point of simulation. These are people who choose to live outside the Matrix, stepping back in to find some form of escapism and intimacy. That can be an interesting idea to explore. But the way Square handles it is pretty ham-fisted. It's basically pajama sword fighting. And the CGI now is pretty much antiquated, so the shock it could have had back in the day is long old. The rest cuts back to the setup from the second movie, as well as the sort of standard action set pieces you can expect from the real-world scenes in The Matrix, which are some of the worst in my opinion. I found that part a little bit dull. So this is probably my least favourite, so let's move on. The Second Renaissance. This is Mahiro Maeda's film, and he's best known in the US at this point for Blue Submarine. Which I always thought was very funny when they bring that up. He's had such a interesting career as a key animator behind many of Arno's projects and beyond as a director in his own right. And what he's been given here is basically the creation story of the Matrix universe. And he said himself as a director, what attracted him to the production was the mix of American script with Japanese animation. The majority of the script did come from the sisters themselves. Characters like the instructor were designed by the director though, and expanded on this sort of Buddhist iconography, as well as the mandalas. It's also a beautiful showcase of digital mixing 2D and 3D, as we'd expect from the studio. It's an interesting mix of cyberspace and religious iconography to tell a mythic story. Akiko Sato helms the CG again, having worked with many of their early projects. The animation is constantly pushed into new territories, but with Michael's software and experience, the studio achieved new heights in terms of pushing themselves further with a variety of techniques in digital technology. And it's composited in such a way where the world can mesh quite well. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it succeeded as well as you can expect for something from 2003. And it definitely helps convey the story. This definitely has some of the harshest imagery of all the collection, showing a real brutality of the sort of war between human and machine.
Who was to say the machine, endowed with the very spirit of man, did not deserve a fair hearing?
It also splits it into two sides of supremacy, and it uses a lot of shorthand for historical imageries to convey its meaning. While it starts grounded in such an apocalyptic landscape, it eventually becomes basically the equivalent of a death metal band cover. And what's interesting here is they gave Maeda the longest production in the whole of this short collection. If you're a real Matrix head here and you're really invested in the story, you're probably going to think this is one of the best ones, since it's an underexplored part of the trilogy. I liked it just fine, I'd call it decent. I had great freedom. The Wachowskis were very generous at allowing me working in my own style. Kid's story. We're talking loose, sketchy, mind-melting entertainment, and coming from the sort of curious brain of Shinji Hashimoto. Animatrix is certainly one of 4C's earliest digital animation productions, opening up to a faster production line and a variety of techniques, but one area which it kind of struggled with, especially back then, is line work. Since Kid Story uses a rough pencil line work, they weren't actually able to do what you generally do in this situation, which is, create complete line work so you can fill it in, like with a paint bucket tool or something. But considering the sort of sketchy atmosphere, that was not really possible. So they had to create these complete secondary shapes in each sequence frame by frame to fill them in, which is effectively like drawing the image twice. A laborious process, but one that pays off with the sort of style we get here. And they certainly had the time and like resources to do it, so why not? They were also lucky enough to work with the actor from The Kid, so they were able to shoot a lot of reference material to sort of build off of, which isn't a regular thing in the industry whatsoever. And the way they use them is quite liberally, so they can sort of expand on them and use their sort of artistic prowess to make them more stylish in the end, especially when they start pushing the limits of what smears can do and the shapes of these characters, almost like the Matrix itself is unfolding. It's such a like small personal tale in comparison to what we just saw. It's a really refreshing choice. It also has like a very small limit to its CG factor, using it only when it needs to be present. But those scenes are pretty fun as well. It's basically a 2D expression for the most part though. Watanabe, being a huge fan of The Matrix, he actually wanted to be on the project as soon as he heard it was happening. Basically the only director who was given 2 separate shorts where he could also play with his own scripts. Also, they had a pretty interesting backdrop here with a San Francisco school, which they used as a huge reference to create the sort of still life quality that is seen as they try to create a postcard version of American life. Really isn't the story that takes hold here though, it's the kinesthetic action and the great sound design. Shinji Ohiro had animated a lot of the skateboarding sequences. I hear he's a fan, and he always works well with Hashimoto, so it's a great duo. A lot of it really does play to the sort of muted day-to-day setting. Even if it pushes beyond that, it's able to achieve a variety of styles in its sketchy format. I'd say it's great. Program. All right. Kawajiri was definitely a top pick on the list of Wachowski's influences, and you can see that through their work, especially when it comes to things like Speed Racer. He accepted the position as long as he could write his own script. And the setting of it was chosen in such a way because Kawajiri thought it was only something that he would choose. Not to mention the producer did want something that was actually Japanese in setting, let's say. This is the first short animated at Madhouse, Kawajiri's home base, and a frequent collaborator of 4C. And for good reason, as we'll see, Madhouse brings something special with their sequences. In the commentary, they say they wanted to achieve 2D animation to the fullest potential and as flat as possible. With its black shadows and multi-layer shading, a limited palette pushed all the way, with the help of Minowa. He's Kawajiri's right-hand man, and without him he wouldn't be able to achieve the heights of his animation career. No one quite does horses like him, I'm going to say that much.
It's ironic that one could be more at peace in the virtual world.
Program is such an intense condensing of Kawajiri style. Coming off of the production of Bloodlust, the team are in top form, and they're trying to be even leaner here. There's an astonishing amount of detail and grit to it, with a high contrast look, sort of coating everything in textures and overlays. Sometimes it sort of recalls a ukiyo-e painting over anything the director's prior done in his projects. Not only that, but the multi-planes of the world are broken and played with in a way that seems to take advantage of the virtual space, which is great for the sort of Matrix setting, as they jump through objects opposed to actually working through a 3D space, sort of pushing the limits of like super flat 2D space. All that animatism and stuff. There's a brutality and speed all around. 7 minutes never felt so sharp. All the editing and final sting of the twist, which contextualizes how brutal the use of the Matrix can be on a psychological basis. It's kind of a dick move too. Superb. Speaking of superb, what about world record? From one Madhouse talent to another, we have the protege of Kawajiri. He's really defining his style here with a short which achieves what he'd later do as well with Redline. Kawajiri wrote it, but Koike was the one that directed it. It's a high-octane drawing bursting with vigor and his own sharper flowing slow-mo. That's so effortless that it's a complete wonder that he is able to do it in the first place. It's just complete confidence coming from its study of motion. Transitions and match cuts that jump between the settings also are immaculate. All the wacky, exaggerated motions of the characters, which hit 11 in the races as we see the muscles spasm and tear. Hits you right in the gut, you know? It's pure power. Madhouse is the greatest. Or at least they were once upon a time. I'm going to say, best, baby. Now let's get back to 4C and Morimoto. This short was an opportunity as a byproduct of him working with Otomo, but having those scheduling conflicts as he was still working on Steam Boy at the time. Also, since he was one of the heads of 4C, it seemed to make sense that he would be working on it. It's definitely like quite a easygoing story though, I'll give them that. The production of all these shorts could be intense. The team on Beyond were only about 30 or so people, 10 of which were key animators working on it over a year. The designs call back to Morimoto's early work and his love for ragtag misfits, with Toshio Honda on character designs. He also mentioned how they shot some reference material as they used it for sort of a rotoscoping element to the sequences, to really pick up on those timid body language and some of the emotion they play with, since it's such an important part of the short, recalling those sort of falling dreams. It's cerebral and surreal. It is a serious glitch in the Matrix, where you fall further down the rabbit hole. It is accomplished by its soundtrack from the Matrix composer himself, Dan Davis, whose sort of unfiltered sounds add to the vibe. The short uses bursts of first person in a handheld sort of style for a newer digital processing, recalling virtual reality, almost like his first short, huh? Coming back to it, huh? As it progresses, its soothing tone sort of absorbs itself past the conventional narrative. Its floating characters ready to fall through the world, a sight to see when you see it drawn. Are there any of these special projects that stand out as fond memories? I would say the Animatrix and Genius Party were some of my favourites. Detective Story paints a vision of a retro future noir. It was Watanabe's idea, a hard-boiled typeset into the Matrix, using a traditional jazz soundtrack as if it was made in the 40s. It also finds ways around noir animation, never being able to capture that sort of textural element of the film stock, or moreover going too dark. It uses these sort of textural filters with its animation, and adding layers of noise and distortion, as well as a very selective colour palette. It fits the Matrix with its occasional flourishes of green. It makes the world pop. It all also helps make sense of the rougher 3D models and makes them blend better into the world. Even as the science has like a sketchy aesthetic. Yes, this takes a grounded look over the rubber reality from his prior short, recalling a different age. I started on Kid Story, but then a chance to do Detective Story came up, and I wanted to differentiate the atmosphere of the two of them. We have Katsuto Nakasawa, who did the animation direction here, with a similar sort of tone to his Kill Bill short, with that sharp, articulate style feeding back into the cycles of the Matrix, even though it's sort of funny because it's a Japanese perspective on an American genre perspective from a series which is a American perspective on a Japanese perspective, you know, you're jumping around in circles. While Watanabe dabbled in noir beforehand, this is his first deep dive into the genre, down to the circular story and dour ending. It's able to tell a complete story in a small space without feeling hampered, or like a condensed action scene. It's got that rough edge, and it's definitely one of the finest shorts, even if it had too many difficulties to list in its production. Excellent. Peter Chung's work suddenly falls into the land of the Matrix when you look at something like the Aeon Flux. And this is basically his own Matrixified version of that. It's one of the few guest people from outside of Japan who worked on the production here. It has these sort of very grimy backdrops.
We ended up short a director at one point because kind of scheduling conflicts forced one of our directors to leave the project. And so Randy suggested, well, why don't we get Peter Chung, get that Aeon Flux guy.
His short was produced in Korea with his own team, and CGI characters hold a sort of predominant position throughout. All the machines were created in 3D. This was my first experience using CG extensively. I enjoyed working in a new set of tools. The good thing about computer animation is that you can easily make adjustments as you go. Ironically, you could also say it's a more organic process since it allows the animation to evolve, while traditional animation requires you to be a lot more locked down in your preconceived plan. The team attempted to do something not explored in prior pieces. And yeah, this is out there, I'll say that much. It's like a creepy nightmare, only to be pushed by the design of the work. The elements of boredom in this apocalypse are kind of interesting to explore. You go out of your way to sort of manipulate and torture these robots, it's no wonder it might end up biting you one day. is definitely sort of a visual journey which takes advantage of the CGI, especially with the camera movements. Make of the ending what you will, but yeah, it's definitely an experimental one. Pretty cool. Decent. This is a solid collection. Only one of them I find particularly underwhelming. Here's my ranking, but the beauty of it all is I'm sure everyone has a variety of picks and top spots coming from the strength of the team working on it. Animatrix is an absolute trendsetter, and I'm sure I'm not the first to say that either. For Warner, it was a massive success, and looking at the sale numbers from the time, it made more than enough to balance its meager budget. Also encouraging Warner to continue its pursuit of anime in the future, which they have been doing to this day if you look at things like Adult Swim and newer projects on the horizon. And this won't be 4C's last anthology either.
Hello there, we have Kat over here. And you have just watched a 4Sember or a 4C month video. Now there's supposed to be a bunch of them. We're supposed to be releasing them every day after all. And at the end of the month we should have a full, expanded, revised version for everyone to see. If you want to keep checking them out, there should be a playlist probably on the screen, I'm guessing. And to thank everyone who has helped support me during this period of time, it's been a little bit hectic to try and get these videos out. I need to thank all my patrons who get exclusive content. I got a lot of stuff earlier, etc., etc. Jay, Steven's mum, Takayuki Suzuki, Alex Moriarty, Paul, Subsofa, I hope I'm saying that right, and Chunks. Among all these other people, I've had to expand. We're in the editing dock right now, but I've had to expand the screen because I knew there was more space I needed to get all the names on there, so I've changed the angle slightly. Yeah, thanks everyone for their support. Check out tomorrow for the next video.